What's up, everybody? Welcome to Move the Sticks, presented by Zaxby's. DJ and Bucky back with you. And Buck, we actually have an NFL game to discuss, and we will do that shortly with a good friend of ours, David Shaw from Stanford.
Yeah, really excited to have Coach Shaw on. He gives a different perspective, not only because he's one of the best minds in football, but because he's lived in both worlds, college and the pro. He'll be able to give us some of that unique perspective preparing without a preseason and how that played out during this opening game.
Yeah, it was, it was so great to have NFL football. And I was kind of surprised. I haven't really kept up, to be honest, full disclosure, of what stadiums were going to have some fans and what stadiums weren't. But it sounded like that was all just for like 17,000 people or something like that. It sounded, when you're watching the game, just from a viewer standpoint, it sounded like a regular game. And they do the wide shots. You see a lot of all those empty seats. But I don't know how you were, Buck, but I thought from a quality of play standpoint and an environment standpoint, it felt like a regular football game.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. I enjoyed it. I was very, very surprised. I was surprised at the quality of play. Not a lot of free snap penalties, which is what you normally will see early in games. And I thought the tackling was pretty good. I felt like those teams were very prepared. Didn't see a lot of missed tackles in open field. I didn't feel like it was a sloppy game when it came to the physicality part of it. I felt like everybody did a really good job of prepping their team. Now, it certainly didn't play out the way the Houston Texans wanted to play out, because once they got off their opening 15, they had a tough time moving the ball consistently. But overall, I thought the gameplay was good. And if it goes back to what you and I both learned in college, typically most teams make their biggest improvement from week 1 to week 2. I think we'll see the Texans be a much improved team going forward. And then they got their first one under their belt.
I think their identity is a little different too. With Hopkins not there and with David Johnson inserted into the lineup and Randall Cobb, there were some newer pieces there. And I thought, with the Chiefs, obviously Clyde Edwards-Helaire, which we'll get into with Coach Shaw, was fantastic. But he was kind of dropped into a really completed offense. And I felt like they kind of already know who they are, what they're all about. And I thought that showed. I thought there was a difference between the team that has their identity and maybe a team that's still trying to find theirs.
Yeah, no, I think the Kansas City Chiefs really, really know their identity. But I would say this. I think they're probably a more dangerous team now than they had been last year. And that's saying a lot for a team that has gone to a championship game and gone to a Super Bowl in back-to-back years under Pat Mahomes. But I'll say this, and we'll talk about Clyde Edwards-Helaire with Coach Shaw. But when we're in the draft process, so much of the challenge that we face is we're grading players for the entire league. We're not necessarily grading them for a team. And I think what Clyde Edwards-Helaire is, he is the perfect example of fit in scheme. And when we're working for our teams in the past, working for the Seahawks and the Panthers respectively, you working for the Ravens, the Browns, the Eagles, you grade differently based on how your team views players at a position and how they'll be utilized. And I think for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I don't know if he was universally known as the number one running back across the board on every team, but for the Kansas City Chiefs, I think you now understand why he was the top running back for them. His game fits exactly how Andy Reid wants to utilize the position. And we haven't even really scratched the surface on how they can utilize him in the passing game. But as a running back, his patience, his power, his stop-start ability, it really, really works. And the fact that he was able to get 25 carries as a rookie, the workhorse element. And I think what you saw is like Andy Reid was fine piecemealing it in the past, but I think he's much more confident as a play caller when he has everybody, when he has a workhorse that I don't have to change. I have one guy, and I'm going to feature this one guy. I think that is what came out of it for me watching the game on Thursday night.
Yeah, you talk about that fit. I mean, we just talked about it the other day. I picked him to be the offensive rookie of the year because it is a perfect fit. I went back and pulled up my report. So I ended up with Edwards-Helaire as my second running back, and he was my 32nd overall player. He ended up being the 32nd overall pick. But here's what I wrote on the college stuff, Buck. Short, compact runner, quick feet, power, and prowess in the passing game. On inside runs, he's a quick stepper with darting lateral agility to slide and avoid contact. Runs extremely low to the ground. He's tough for opponents to square up. Drives his legs on contact and pulls out of a lot of tackles. He's quick to capture the perimeter and refuses to run out of bounds, choosing instead to fight for extra yards. He's outstanding in the passing game. He can line up anywhere in the formation. He runs clean, crisp routes, catches the ball outside his frame very smoothly, and he's outstanding after the catch. His ability to start, stop, and space is elite. He's rarely used in pass protection because of his value out in the route. Overall, Edwards-Helaire has a similar skill set to Austin Ekeler. I envision similar role and results at the next level. The scary thing, if you're an opponent of the Chiefs, they didn't even really cut him loose in the passing game yet. I mean, they didn't have to.
No, they didn't. I think that's what's really, really scary. And I think, and I'm going to kind of tip the hat to Andy Reid, because I don't know if a lot of offensive play callers can do this, but the discipline and the restraint that he showed, saying, hey, okay, this would be a game where maybe we won't hit the 40-point mark, but we're going to control the game because you're giving us the opportunity to run the ball at 5 yards a clip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep taking these runs until you show us that you can stop it. And so now the reason why the Chiefs are more dangerous in my mind, they can change styles. It's almost like a basketball team that can, hey, we can spread and shred and shoot the three, but we also have a post-up presence. So however you want to defend us, we have a counter tactic. I now believe the Chiefs have a counter to every conceivable defense or defensive philosophy that you can throw at them. They can just settle and say, oh, how are you playing us? At the end of the first quarter, they can change and play a completely different way, and that's going to enable them to win a bunch of games at a high level.
Yeah, that's a great point, Buck. We're going to get to our conversation here with Coach Shaw right now, but I want you to stay through this interview, which is fantastic. On the backside of it, there's a couple other news items that I want to touch on with you, and we can hit on. But first, let's get to our conversation with Stanford head coach David Shaw, somebody that I worked with the Baltimore Ravens. You were coached by his father, if I'm being correct, right?
Yeah, I was coached by his father and him when I was with the Oakland Raiders. So they both have had a huge impact on the way that I view the game.
Yeah, so it's been just a great friend and a great resource for us. And we had a chance to visit with him about everything that took place in the game last night, as well as what's going on in his world at the college level right now. So here's our conversation with Stanford head coach David Shaw. All right, Buck, let's bring in our good buddy here, David Shaw. And Coach, first of all, we're going to get to everything and the craziness of your life right now. It's all been kind of shaken upside down here on the college side of things. But we want to take advantage of some of this time that you have right now to get your thoughts on the NFL. And let's start with the first game we saw last night between Kansas City and what we saw from the Houston Texans. Just quality of play, Dave. What do you think of the quality of play for not having an offseason?
Well, I think early on, both teams sputtered a little bit, but I thought they settled in pretty well. As a coach, I'm sure all those coaches were worried about not having those preseason games, and even those few plays that those starters play, it's still nice to get those first real hits against somebody else. But I think both teams settled in. I think those are, as we all know, those are two of the most talented teams in the NFL. I think the Texans played about as well as you can play, but you got to score points. You got to score points against that Kansas City Chiefs offense because they are going to score points. So you have to match them to a certain degree. I want to say I thought I was impressed with the Chiefs, their patience, their willingness to run the football with a great young running back. You've got the most dangerous quarterback throwing and running combination in the league. You've got the most dangerous weapons in the league, but you now also have a running game. And I think the rest of the NFL was hoping they wouldn't see what they saw last night, which is a composed, balanced, physical offense that will scare you over the top and an attacking defense that can get after your quarterback.
David, it's funny. You have a unique perspective because you sat at the knee of Bill Walsh, having played at Stanford under him. And so you understand the core tenets of the West Coast offense. So now when you have a West Coast offense or Andy Reid's version of the West Coast offense, and you put in a running back who is tough enough to run inside, but also can catch the ball out the backfield, even though we didn't see it, what does that do to that offense?
Well, both of you guys know my dad, Willie Shaw, longtime defensive coordinator. They have now the couple of things that scare defensive coordinators. You've got a quarterback who is young, who's got a cannon for an arm, who's also mobile and can extend plays or run and make plays with his legs. But now you've got a running game. So you have to pick your poison. Do you load the box to stop the running game and die quickly? Or do you play too high and lose the game 8 to 10 yards at a time with their running game? That's a really, really tough choice. You're going to have to take some chances. But the problem is when you take chances against a team like this, run or pass, they can really hurt you.
Dave, everybody's kind of compared this version of an Andy Reid offense to maybe some other versions that he's had, or you look at other West Coast offenses. When we were talking a little bit earlier before we started, I thought you brought up an interesting comparison of that offense looked a little similar to one that you saw back in the NFL with Peyton Manning.
Absolutely. Peyton Manning with 2 Hall of Fame receivers, a borderline Hall of Fame tight end, a Hall of Fame running back, a very good offensive line. And now they just say, are you playing too high? Great. We're going to run the ball. Oh, you give a single high? Great. Try to cover Marvin Harrison. Try to cover Reggie Wayne. Try to take care of our tight end. This team now has the exact same thing. And if you do guess right and you play the perfect coverage against the passing game, the quarterback will just buy 5 more seconds until somebody shakes open and throw the ball down the field for a touchdown. It's a difficult prospect to play these guys. You better be at your absolute best, because they can beat you when they're not at their absolute best, because they've got game changers.
You know, it's funny, Dave, because you mentioned your first overall analysis of the Chiefs offense. You talk about them being physical. The thing that stood out to me, I felt like the running game gave them a different level of physicality that we hadn't seen from that offense. Based on how you guys have always done it at Stanford, what is it about the running game that adds to the physical element and the identity of your squad?
There's no question about it. Every good team I've ever been on, high school, college, NFL, if your offensive line is eating, the rest of the team feels great, right? When those big guys are feeling good and moving people, you feel like you can do anything. And the exact opposite is true as well for the defense. If they can't stop you running the football, as a defensive coordinator, you don't have answers. If you can't stop a team running the football, you don't have answers. And when they come off the ball like that and they're physical and they're confident, and now the play action game even has more sting, that's scary, very scary.
One of the things I'm interested to hear from you is, we've talked about on the podcast how the NFL season this year, similar to what college coaches have dealt with for a long time coming into week 1. You've got no preseason game. You know, perhaps you've got a new coordinator on one side of the ball or the other. You feel out the game as it goes along. And then also, you know, not being in preseason games to hit, as you mentioned. Have you got into a week 1 in your coaching career and had that kind of aha moment where you're like, man, maybe we hit too much, or maybe we didn't hit enough, or, you know, man, we thought this offense that we were going to be playing was going to give us this and they gave us that? I would just love to know that moment that you have in the week 1, because I think the NFL teams are going to experience that for the first time.
Yeah, as you both know, I did 9 years in the NFL before I did major college football. So I was in that preseason mentality of, right, you kind of, by that 3rd preseason game after training camp, you have a really good idea of who you have. In college football or in the NFL right now, without those preseason games, you go into game 1 with kind of an idea of who you have, but it's really going to be 2-3 games before you completely know, right? Which of your veterans came back and they're not what they were last year? Which of your veterans came back and they're better than they were? Which of your young guys that you're hoping make an impact, but you're not really sure because they didn't do anything in the preseason, will those guys show up or will they not show up? And that's the thing both of you experienced, you know, where you have that late round draft pick, that mid round draft pick, that maybe this is a special teams guy, and oh my gosh, by the end of training camp, like, this guy's going to start, right? Yep. You miss those aha moments during training camp, so you're going to get those aha moments the first month of the season.
So Dave, in thinking about that, because you're talking about like those aha moments happening in the opening game, how quickly are you willing to change once you figure out in week 2 or week 3, like, we need to kind of shift our offensive or our defensive identity based on who we have, not based on what we thought we had?
Yeah, that's huge. That's really huge. And as Daniel mentioned, I played for Bill Walsh, and Bill was the master of the West Coast offense, but also the master tinkerer, right? Mm-hmm. We can switch and emphasize different things week to week if we need to, or we can make big changes because the way you set up the offense is that it's adjustable, which is what we believe. I think Andy Reid's the same way. All those guys are the same. So you have to be able to see what you have. But sometimes when you don't have a preseason, it's going to take 3 or 4 games before you really completely know. And you have to be willing to see what you have and realize, as my dad used to always say, this is a players' league. You have to cater to your players' abilities and give them the best chance to go out there and win the football game.
There was one thing, David, that came up in the game last night where you saw the Kansas City Chiefs really trying to isolate a guard for the Houston Texans and put Chris Jones on him and just let him wear him out. And you even saw it with J.J. Watt. J.J. Watt, they were like, forget, we don't want to put him out there with Schwartz. Let's kick him inside. We feel like we like our matchups there a little bit better. When you're putting a game plan together and you go back to, I mean, think of all the great players you've had at Stanford. Christian McCaffrey's the one that jumps to my mind. But are there certain games where you're trying to just get our guy, this is our key guy, we want to get him the ball, versus some other times where you might find kind of a Waldo, as me and Bucky like to call him, on the defensive side of the ball and say, okay, he's going to get a lot of it today?
Yeah, I think that's the balance. You have to have something that you believe in. You have to have the roots of your scheme in something that you truly believe in. And as long as it's adjustable to your guys, but absolutely every single game, you find out where your best matchups are. As you all know, we believe we are tight in you. We're going to find that matchup for Kobe Fleener, Zach Ertz, Austin Hooper. We're going to find out who can that guy beat. Is it a corner? Is it a safety? Is it a nickel guy? Is it a linebacker? For Christian McCaffrey, it didn't matter, right? Whoever was going to come was going to get beaten. That one was easy. That one was easy. But we all know in the NFL, you've got the greatest players in the world playing a fast, physical game. You try to find your best against their least as many times as possible. J.J. Watt's probably the best example because of his versatility. He can play left end. He can play right end. He can play stand-up outside linebacker. He can play a 3 technique. He can play a nose. So week to week, and I think the Texans have done a phenomenal job throughout his career of finding those spots to let him get off and make game-changing plays. Yes, he can beat your best player, but he's going to beat your worst player even faster.
Dave, I want to tap into your skills because you've been a long-time play caller, and we often hear announcers throughout the term playing complimentary ball, where at the end of the game on Thursday, in the middle of the game Thursday night, the Houston Texans were driving. They attempted a long field goal. They didn't get it. It was 25 seconds left, and it gave Kansas City the opportunity to do what I call a double score opportunity, meaning you close out the half with a score and you open the second half with a score. When you're the opposing offensive coordinator or you're the head coach, how often do you get into the ear of the coordinator and say, hey, man, let's not give them another opportunity to chalk up some points?
Bucky, that is one of the most difficult things to do when you're playing against a great football team, right? It's one of the toughest things to do because the smart thing to do, obviously, yes, let's punt it, let's play field position, let's not give them a chance to double up on you. And at the same time, you're sitting there saying, okay, if we don't score every time we have the ball, even if it's field goal, we're going to be back behind. So do I take chances at the end when I'm down by 10, or do I take chances early on when the score is tied, or maybe we're up a little or down a little? That's the nuances. And so for me, you have to pick your spots. Are we doing well? Are we moving the ball? Or how are we playing on defense? If you're sitting there saying, hey, you know what? Gosh, we're playing great on defense. Okay, maybe we play field position. You're sitting there saying, we're not stopping these guys. Like, we need a score right now. Let's get 3 up if we can get it. Let's take that chance. So as a play caller, you have to kind of know how the flow of the game is going. But at the same time, you have to realize who you're playing against. And sometimes you have to take those chances.
Dave, I'd be curious to get your take. You talk about your time in the National Football League. If you looked at the quarterback position league-wide when you were last in the NFL to where it is now, I mean, how many years has it been, Dave, now since you've been in college?
Gosh, going on 15.
So 15 over that 15-year period, when you look at the landscape of the quarterback at the NFL, and obviously the college system, that's what's producing it. But just how much has it changed from a stylistic skill set standpoint, what the quarterback was 15 years ago in the National Football League to where they are now?
That's a great question. I would say the two big things that come to my mind. Number one is, as you mentioned, the influence of the college game. So you see a lot of quarterbacks now that are under 6'2", that are mobile, that maybe are not run first guys, but guys that can run. You see a few, some less version of the statuesque 6'5" Drew Bledsoe gunslinger, right? You still see some of those guys, but you see a little bit fewer of those guys. You've got guys that are a little bit more mobile, a little bit more athletic. But I will say this too. I think you've got guys that are a little bit less efficient. Take a few more chances and throw the ball into coverage, throwing the ball up. I do know, going through this process, NFL draft, which I have with you guys for years now, and talking to a lot of coordinators, a lot of guys that interview these coaches, these quarterbacks coming out, their understanding of the NFL game is less than it was before. Reading coverages, understanding blitzes, changing protections, going from some of those spread offenses, which are outstanding. And there are a lot of spread offenses in concepts in the NFL right now, which is great. But when you're going against Greg Williams and you're going against Vic Fangio and you're going against some of these guys, the variety of defenses you see on a day-to-day basis, week in and week out in the NFL, you've got to have a more better understanding of how to protect yourself against those guys than I think you have to be in the college. So I think the quarterback play is a little bit different, in some ways better, in some ways maybe not as good. But that's the biggest thing for me, is those guys being able to diagnose from under center or from the shotgun of how I can protect myself so I can get this ball out of my hands.
You know, Dave, because you're right there in the Bay Area, you're in the backyard of Kyle Shanahan and the San Francisco 49ers. That quote unquote Shanahan system has really been popularized, not only because of the run element, but because of the way the system maybe elevates quarterbacks. What is it about that combination of the zone running game and the stretch bootleg or play action system that really allows quarterbacks to play at a high level?
I'm not going to be the first person to say this, but Kyle Shanahan as a play caller and offense designer is up among the best in the NFL right now. And for me, I look at it this way: the combination of the Mike Shanahan offense and the Bill Walsh West Coast offense, which he learned and was outstanding, taken from John Gruden and John Gruden's West Coast roots. The marriage between those two philosophies and his little Kyle Shanahan special sauce that he's thrown in there over the last few years, I think is really, really dangerous. You see quick rhythm passing, you see screens, you see outside zone running, you see play action, you see movements, you see some gadgets. You see something every week off balance that's going to throw you off balance. You're going to see condensed formations, spread out formations, utilization of the tight end, utilization of the wide receiver in the screen game. There's so much to it, and the guys that play in it, they're not confused, right? We've heard that over the years. Some offenses, there's a lot to it, but guys make a lot of mistakes. You don't hear that. They teach it very simply. They execute at a very, very high level, and they get the most out of the guys that they have. It's a lot of fun to watch.
I'm glad you guys talked about that, because we've discussed kind of the growth of 12 personnel in the NFL, and something you're very familiar with and have done forever. But now we're seeing more and more play callers feeling like that gives them more options. You just explain to the listeners, what we're talking about there and what kind of advantages when you have those two tight ends out there that are versatile.
As you said, this has been one of our bread and butters for years. And something you said earlier, Daniel, is huge. It's matchups. If you've got two or three very good tight ends, which a lot of times we'll have 3 or 4, if you've got 2 really good tight ends on the field at the time, what is the defense's response? Are they going to play a nickel? Are they going to take out a linebacker and bring in an extra defensive back? But both of those tight ends are good run blockers. Now you've got an advantage. But now if they're going to play base and play with just 4 DBs, and now you're going to have a linebacker or a safety cover a Zach Ertz, cover an Austin Hooper. So that puts the defense in a very, very difficult position before the ball ever gets snapped. They have to make a decision. How are we going to match up with this personnel? Which is why you see these guys now that look like power forwards that are flocking to the NFL over the last decade, because it's not hard for them. Hey, put me in the slot at 6'5", 250, and I run a 4.5. Who's going to cover me? And if you've got 2 guys like that, okay, we might have one guy that can cover, which you saw Justin Reed last night. He's a guy that can cover those guys. Well, you better have 2 guys like that can cover 2 of those guys. And now you're playing this inside game. If you've got a receiver outside also, now is that safety going to play over the top of the receiver or play over the top of the tight end? So that tight end position has become more and more valuable. It forces a defense to make decisions personnel-wise, and now you've got a matchup issue. If you've got a premier tight end, as the Kansas City Chiefs and the 49ers and the Eagles have found out over and over again, we've got a guy in there that you can't match up with, and we're going to feed him the ball, and you don't have an answer.
It's funny, Dave, because now that we're talking about like kind of under the hood football stuff, we talked about 12 personnel. Well, the other thing that's been popularized has been 22 personnel, or as you and I know, U personnel, where you have 2 tight ends, 2 running backs, a tailback, and a fullback, and 1 wide receiver. Why is that formation increasing in popularity, and why is it so difficult to defend?
So once again, you've got an influx of tight ends. You got big physical bodies, and a lot of guys don't grow up in high school and college playing against that look. So maybe for 1 or 2 plays, there's a linebacker or safety that'll stick his nose in there, but they don't have a history of doing that. But on play 8, 9, 10, 12, 14, now to stick your nose in there over and over again, it's not something that they're used to doing. So if you have the guys up front to do it, and you've got the runner that as we've seen, and Daniel and I in particular, you've got a big monster that we had in Baltimore that you can feed over and over again. At some point in time, one guy is out of position and you break. And you've seen over the years with us, with Christian McCaffrey, Bryce Love, going back to Tyler Gaffney and Toby Gerhart, it's that carry 15 through 25 where if one guy's out of position or one guy's a little bit tired or one guy honestly just turns it down, now you've got a huge play for a touchdown.
I think it's interesting because a lot of people, when they talk about, the innovation of the college game making its way to the NFL game, I feel like Stanford doesn't get mentioned with that innovation. And yet all these things we're talking about, you guys have been doing for a very long time. And another example, which I would love for people to recognize this and give you some credit for this, because we see Deebo Samuel last year in the playoffs, especially in the Super Bowl, as a runner and what the problems he caused. I would love to go back when you had Ty Montgomery, because that to me was one of the first times I had seen it where you had a guy on the field and I don't know, is he going to be a receiver? Is he going to be in the backfield as a running back? You can get him the ball in a variety of ways. But when you have that, Bucky's used the phrase, they called him a wing back, and we're seeing a bunch of these teams try and find that guy. You had Ty Montgomery doing that a long time ago, Dave. What was the thought process behind crafting that role for him?
Honestly, it's like baseball. They call it a 5-tool guy, right? That's what Ty Montgomery was for us. That's what Christian McCaffrey was for us. That's what we used Charlie Garner for. John Gruden did a phenomenal job in Philadelphia and Oakland with a guy like Charlie Garner. You've got a guy with so many abilities. You put him out there. So what we did with Ty is he was a punt returner. He was the nation's best kickoff returner. He was a wide receiver that could go deep. He was a wide receiver you can throw the screens to. He could go in there and play the slot. And then we would throw him back there in the backfield as a running back and also as a wildcat quarterback. So at any given time, he could line up in so many different places and do so many different things that now the defense has to account for him as well as our scheme. Where's this guy lining up? We better find this guy. Once again, we did the same thing with Christian McCaffrey. Line him up outside, line him up in the slot, let him be the wildcat quarterback, hand the ball to him on a screen or on a fly sweep. Now he's a distraction. We throw the ball to somebody else. Having the ability to move guys like that around, put the ball in their hands in different locations. I think the Chiefs also do a phenomenal job of that with their guys, fly sweeps and motions and counter motions and backfield motions. Some of them are eye distractions and some of them are just, hey, we just want to make you off balance so we can spit this ball out to Mr. Hill and see if you can catch him.
It's funny. So now, Dave, I want to get in your wheelhouse as a college head coach. Obviously, the pandemic has changed so much. Like, everyone is taking the precautions to make sure that their players are healthy and safe and those things. But as a football coach, now that your body clock, your mind is off because you're so used to preparing your team to play in the fall. How do you make those changes to now get ready for a season that will happen in the spring? How have things changed for you from a planning standpoint?
Well, first of all, like most head coaches, we live by calendars. And when your calendar gets thrown up in the air and you don't have answers for your guys, that's a really, really difficult thing to be sitting in a head coach's seat for. Thankfully, with our deal with Quidel, to get to daily testing, which is what the NFL has been doing, and the NBA's got a great system too. But for us to be able to get back to daily testing at some point in time, hopefully October, November, now we can see this season on the horizon. We can actually, this is the first time we actually give our guys a calendar. Hey guys, look, we have a calendar. It might adjust a little bit, but now we can actually start to prepare. I think our guys worked so hard over the summer to get ready, and then we've been in this no man's land for about a month now. But now it's starting to take shape again. Guys are getting excited. I think one of the things we've done really well as a conference, but also especially on our campus, is keeping our guys informed and letting them know that the doctors are going to drive this. The football coaches are not going to drive this. The doctors are going to drive this, and give us the best opportunity to keep them safe and play the game that we love.
Dave, I'm sure you've had conversations with some of your players, faced with that decision, whether to go start training right now for the draft or to stay there and kind of follow this plan as it's evolving. How have those conversations gone? How difficult of a conversation it is, because there's no precedent for this?
Yeah, I take the same stance I've always taken, which is I want to hear from the student athletes and their families, where they are, how they're feeling. I don't tell them what to do, but I give them guidance. My experience as an NFL evaluator, where I think they stand. I contact people that I know in the business, both you and guys that are our NFL team. So I give them the best information I can, so they make the best decision they can. and then I support them. And whatever they want to do, I'm with them. As you all know, we sit in everybody's living room. We talk about bringing them to Stanford. We're going to do what's best for your student athlete, best for your son, your daughter, your grandson, your whole family. So we give them guidance, and then we listen to their decisions, and we go with them and support them and wish them the best. So I think we've got a great system. We've got a bunch of great guys, as both of you know, and I think a lot of our guys are making the right decisions.
David, I think 2020 will certainly be the test of adaptability and flexibility. And so you've kind of talked about the players, giving them the information, and then you as a coach and your coaching staff being very fluid with how you operate. How challenging is it to kind of operate in this no man's land where you don't really know which players you're going to have? You're trying to map out your quote unquote preparation schedule and what you may want to do. What are those staff meetings like for you guys when you're trying to talk just ball?
Yeah, it's been tough. There's been some ebb and flow where we've kind of backed off the football a couple times because we weren't sure when that season was going to go. And one of the things you always have to be careful of is collective fatigue. As a leader of people, and when the season was imminent, we ramped up, and when the season was not imminent, then we ramped back down, right? Because you can't stay at that fever pitch for a long time because your guys they'll get tired, and when the time comes, they won't be able to go. So we've backed off the last few weeks. Now that we have the pot of gold, looks like it's at the end of the rainbow. We have a clear vision of where we're going to be. Now we can start that slow ramp up back in so we can peak at the right time. And as you guys know, I mean, you have to peak at the right time. You can't peak too early because you won't be able to sustain. You can't peak too late because then you'll be back behind. So for us now, we've got an idea of a calendar. So now we can start to ramp our guys back up. So when it's time to play football, we'll be ready to go.
Now, one of the cool things about the football world is it is such a tight-knit community, and in the coaching fraternity, even more tight-knit. And I don't think many people know this. So I would love if you could just explain a little bit about your friendship and relationship with Dabo Swinney, because I don't think people would look at that on the surface and say the style of play, the personalities, like how did that friendship come together, and how special has that relationship been for you guys?
Well, you're grateful to Phil Knight and Nike, where we go on our Nike football coaches trip, and just as soon as we got there, we're in transit, getting to the hotel. Just happened to sit next to Dabo. His wife, Kathleen, just happened to sit next to my wife, Corey. And independently, we're having these conversations. And it's one of those deals. It's almost like when I met you guys, we kind of talk a little bit, then you realize that you're really talking. Like we got a lot in common. Like we see things very similarly. And halfway through where the trip, Dabo and I were looking at each other like we believe a lot of the same things. And the way I am for me, once again, like I am with you two guys, if your heart is pure and you're doing this thing for the right reason, I'm going to open my ears to you. I'm going to open my heart to you. I'm going to let you in. And Dabo's one of those guys. His heart is on his sleeve every single day. He is faith, family, football, no question about it. He is honest. He is open. He'll take criticism and take it in stride and say, shoot your arrows at me because this is who I am. And I really appreciate that. There's no falsity in there. There's reality. And I think he felt the same thing from me. That we care about our guys. It's not just football all the time, although we love the sport. We have a lot of the same idiosyncrasies. We hate that our family members steal our socks. So to put our initials in our socks, and our initials just happen to be the exact same. And we're telling our wives the same thing, and our wives' initials are exactly the same also, which is crazy. But we saw a lot of commonalities, and just I appreciate people that doing this job as hard as it is and as crazy as it is, but they do it with the right reasons and they do it with integrity.
Dave, I can't let you go without talking to you about like team building and culture building. I've seen your TEDx talks and the way that you kind of presented and talked about why football is important. But if you were to just give like a 2 or 3 minute synopsis on the culture that you have been a part of establishing at Stanford when it relates to the football team, just kind of let me have it. Let me have the spiel.
So for me, and once again, I'm a Stanford alum. I'm a Stanford guy. So for me, I go look up words in the dictionary. So the first time I ever had to talk about culture, I looked it up in the dictionary. And of course, there's a bunch of different definitions. The definition that I really clung to is, I'm going to paraphrase here, right? I can't say verbatim, but it's a group of people that have shared practices and beliefs. So if you start with that, now I'm not bringing people in to change them into my beliefs. I try to bring people that believe the same thing that we believe. So we're bringing the guys to Stanford that believe in being great on the football field and great academically and responsible socially. So as long as we bring in the right guys, we will organically have the right culture. So many guys, I think, in my position, in head coaches' positions, they sell it so much publicly that we're going to change the culture. Well, a set of rules doesn't change culture. A big personality doesn't change culture. Bringing in the right people changes the culture, right? Which many of us have been a part of on different teams. When you've got your culture set, which is having the right group of human beings around you, and you bring in somebody that's maybe halfway in between, I call it positive peer pressure, right? Mm-hmm. That's how you get that guy in line. That you don't give that guy a set of rules and say, do this or I'm going to fine you, do this or I'm going to cut you. That guy's going to be whoever he is. But now he comes in and says, wow, everybody's walking this way. Everybody's talking this way. Everybody's doing the right things. Wow, I better get in line or I'm out of here. Like, it's not the rules that I set. It's the guys that we have. So for me, you focus on the people, not the rules, not the set of guidelines. You focus on the right people. When you have the right people, your culture is how you want it to be.
That's fantastic. The last question for me, Dave, because I'm just curious. We're going to be challenged trying to evaluate guys for the draft, right? With some playing, some not playing, some opting out, the whole thing. It's going to be a very challenging year from an NFL evaluation standpoint. From a recruiting standpoint, you're dealing with a lot of those same things with some of these high school kids not having a fall season. If you're trying to learn about the right people, not just what they are on the field, but trying to learn about them as people, you know, what are some of the things that can help us in terms of trying to get to know those guys? What are you trying to do to figure this whole thing out in the recruiting front?
Yeah, so I'm not telling any secrets out of school. I tell anybody that asks me this, and I don't. It's fine with me if other people adopt this practice. I think it's great. We don't just talk to football coaches and recruits. We talk to family members. We talk to the counselors. We talk to people at the school. And for Stanford University, when we walk into the school, and you see this Stanford on our polos, everybody in the school should know who we're coming to see, right? Everybody should say, oh, we know who you're coming to see, because this guy stands out in the classroom, he stands out on the football field, and he stands out as a leader in our school, right? Which is once again what we've been fortunate enough to build at Stanford, to where people know that we're coming for their best guy off the field, their best student, and their best guy on the field. So that's the thing it's not just a pure football evaluation. You know, we talk to the counselor. We need to hear the counselor say, oh, that's one of my favorite students. You know, we talk to a teacher and like, oh yeah, I knew you were here to see him because this is why X, Y, Z. We want to hear that he's a leader. We want to hear that he has high character, right? The football stuff. Hey, you guys have been evaluating football for a long time. It doesn't take a lot of plays, right? 4 or 5 plays. You really know. And if you're not sure, it's probably not the guy. But when you hear those other things, like those other contexts from other areas of their lives, that's when we know who to zero in on. That's why we offer the fewest amount of scholarships every year, because all those things have to come together for Stanford to come knocking.
Oh, that's fantastic. Dave, you've been very generous with your time. I said that was the last one, but due to the fact that our boss is a huge golf fan, have you talked to Tiger lately? How's Tiger doing?
We haven't spoken in a while. We've texted a few times this past year. I know there's a lot of stuff going on. We have a lot of stuff going on. He's got a lot of stuff going on. He's a huge Stanford football fan, and our entire team, we're huge Tiger Woods fans. We root for each other. I know he tries to make it to a game a year when possible. So we're looking forward to the next time he gets a chance to stay on our sidelines.
That's fantastic. Hey, man, thank you so much for your time. We're going to do this again real soon. It's something it's weird for all of us with the calendar being the way that it is, but it's a nice benefit for us to get a chance to holler at you today. Thanks for your time, man.
Great to see you both.
Yeah, Buck, it was great to catch up with Coach, and you can just tell, man, he combines everything that's right about football. He's just a man of extremely high character. He's a brilliant football mind, and he's just somebody that's comfortable in who he is. I mean, he talked about his relationship with Dabo Swinney and how they are who they are, and they're very comfortable with that. And that's one of the reasons why we've got along well for so many years.
Yeah, man, great coach. And I can say that, like, he is great. His dad is also an outstanding coach, outstanding mentor to me. And I just believe that, like, David just understands it at a different level. One, just think about this. He had a chance to play for Bill Walsh. And then he plays for him, so he really understands the pure form of the West Coast offense. He's seen kind of the mastermind at work when he talked about the adaptability and flexibility, ability to tinker and change and make wholesale changes if necessary. But he then goes and works with John Gruden. You saw him there with Brian Billick. He has been able to kind of continue to learn. And then he has an opportunity with Jim Harbaugh to rebuild Stanford and takes it to another level after he takes over for Jim Harbaugh. So what he's been able to accomplish in his career is nothing short of spectacular. And just understanding who he is and what he believes from a football standpoint, I think you feel that confidence when he talks about the game.
Yeah, I mean, it just, again, he's just a great communicator. So it was great to catch up with him. We've seen some contracts come in recently. We saw Jalen Ramsey get huge money, blew out the corner market. And now, as we're discussing this morning, looks like Stephon Gilmore got himself a little more money as well.
Yeah, Stephon Gilmore has his contract adjusted where he bumps up from $10.5 million to $15.5 with incentives that can push it up to $17.5 million. That'll put him right at the Tre'Davious White mark. Now, Jalen Ramsey getting the big money, putting him at $20 a year, those things. I think what we're seeing, and I think it's something that you and I have talked about, the positions that have now gone over the $20 million mark. Obviously, quarterback. We have seen defensive end / outside linebacker, edge rusher go over $20 million. We've seen defensive tackles, particularly pass rushing defensive tackles, get that. We've seen wide receivers get over that mark. We've seen offensive tackles get over that mark. And now we've seen cornerback. So everything that we've talked about for the last 5 or so years has been about the National Football League being a passing league. Well, the one thing to know where the league is trending, follow the money. The money is telling you the position that everyone values the most when you're building a championship team. It is the same things that we talked about. Quarterback, offensive tackle, offensive playmaker, which is namely a wide receiver. And then on defense, people that can hunt the quarterback, defensive end, defensive tackle, and then someone that can shut you down on the outside at cornerback. Those are the ones that are in the $20 million club. And so, like it or not, that's the way people are paying players, and that's what we got to grow accustomed to seeing.
You know, I was thinking about who this sucks for. It sucks for the unicorns. The guys that are at one of those positions that's not a marquee position, but are so much better than everybody else. Because the way the salaries go up is you have, one contract builds upon another. So when you have, 6 or 7 elite players, maybe you're number 6 on the list, but when your time comes up, you vault to number 1, and then the next guy, it keeps building. I just think about George Kittle, and I think about George Kittle where his money is, Buck. For me, he's a $20 million a year value, like with what he brings. But there's no other tight ends with that skill set that can help launch and build on that. Kelsey's is a great player, but there's not enough of them. And you don't have enough of them, so they never get to their true value because the teams have all the negotiating power because they can franchise you at all these lower numbers.
Yeah, no, that's the thing, and that's what's unfortunate for George Kittle. And we'll throw Travis Kelce, but also Zach Ertz is going to be in that conversation. I say that Kittle's different than those guys because to me, Kittle is a complete tie-in. He's half tackle, half playmaking wide receiver. Those other guys are what I call jumbo wide receivers in a tight end body. Like that. That's what they are. That's how you should compensate them. But it does make it very, very interesting. And now the guy who I was curious to see, like when it was time to pay, Derwin James, Jamal Adams, like how teams were going to view that safety position. Derwin James with the injury changed the conversation a little bit. Jamal Adams, based on how he plays. But the way that it's going now, there's a clear divide on how teams value certain positions on defense. It is about getting to the passer and being able to cover the number 1 receiver. And on offense, it's about protecting the passer, giving the passer an explosive option on the perimeter, and then having a passer that can make it happen. And so I think when decision makers stick to the high standard for what it is required to make that amount of money, I think they'll be fine. But you can't pay the next quarterback $40 million just because he's due that and Deshaun Watson and Pat Mahomes are at that mark. But I do think it brings about an interesting conversation with 2 guys, Lamar Jackson and Dak Prescott. Lamar Jackson is in the conversation because you can look at Pat Mahomes and say all the great things about Pat Mahomes and how Pat Mahomes has basically revolutionized the position with the numbers that he's put up. You can make the same argument in a different way for Lamar Jackson, second-year MVP, the numbers that the Ravens offense has put up, or whatever. The trick will be when Lamar Jackson's people come to the table and they say, we want Pat Mahomes type money, $40 million. Do the Ravens say, okay, yeah, we'll do that, but we'll do that on a 2 or 3 year term so we can protect ourselves from his style of play and the durability issues that can come up? Will they approach it like that? For Dak Prescott, if I'm his representatives, I make the argument with Deshaun Watson. Hey, man, it's great that Deshaun Watson is at $30 million, $39 million, but hey, let's look at his accomplishment based on Dak Prescott. Deshaun Watson has only have one season over 4,000 yards. That was at 4,100. His record in winning percentage is about 64%. Dak Prescott is at 62%. Dak Prescott has a 4,900 yard season under his ledger with a couple playoff berths. So now when you're at the table, you can't say, no, Dak, I can't pay you that, because his people would push the numbers across and say, if Deshaun Watson gets this, how come we're not at that same thing? I just think it makes for a fascinating discussion when we get to that mark for those two guys in particular, not necessarily the other guys that come behind them.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to see what happens. To me, I've said it from the beginning. They're gonna a little bit overpay for Dak now, and you're gonna feel just fine about it in the future, or you're gonna wait and you're gonna have to pay through the nose, man. Buck, I think he's gonna be the MVP of the league. People kill me on that on Twitter, by the way. When I look at what he has around him, and I think Dak Prescott has a legitimate shot to be the MVP of the National Football League, and you didn't pay him, it's gonna cost them so much more money.
Because he still has the leverage of the franchise tag in his favor. The franchise tag pays him 120% over what the deal value is. And so now with Pat Mahomes and Watson coming in, the tag goes up. And so it's just, to me, it's still.
I don't understand it.
It is better to pay someone a year too early than a year too late, because the value never goes down. DJ, just think about this. 12, 18 months ago, how crazy we thought it was that Jimmy Garoppolo was sitting at $27.5 million.
That's the deal. It was with Kirk Cousins. We said it with Kirk Cousins. We're like, don't freak out about this. The numbers are going to go flying past that.
Now it's a bargain basement deal. It is crazy that you would sit on the side and not pay the quarterback. And so Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, and those guys, if they show any semblance of being ready to pop, you already got to write the check. And you just have to be willing to listen, to ignore all the outside noise that's telling you, oh my God, you're overpaying. When we just know that as soon as we got to 40 million, the next market is 45. Then someone is going to get to 50. And so that's just the way that it's going to go.
It's crazy. It makes you think about where we're going to be 15 years from now. You know, a quarterback's making $90 million a year. I mean, it's crazy, right? It's crazy. So here's my other conversation I want to have with you before we get out of here today. I was talking to a league personnel guy the other day, and he said, if you look at the numbers, and we can have Jack and research pull this up for us, but if you look historically over the last decade, you see about 60, I think it was mid-60s of number of undrafted free agents that make teams, okay? This year it was low 30s. Something we all predicted and talked about, because these undrafted free agents were not going to get the same opportunities in preseason games and a lack of an offseason. They're all being stashed on practice squads. So if you think about it from this standpoint, there are 30-ish, 30-plus rosterable talents, right? Roster-worthy talents. And we're talking about, I mean, I just doing the Chargers review. You talk about Austin Eckler as an undrafted free agent. I mean, Priest Holmes back in the day, Kurt Warner, all these guys, there's a zillion of them, Hall of Famers, undrafted players. There are NFL starting quality players out there. So if you're a team and you get off to a 1-3 start, 0-4 start, Buck, it's an Easter egg hunt, man. To me, because those guys are on practice squads. There's 30 NFL starting or NFL caliber players littered on practice squads right now. So you might as well go. We're going to bring in 4 of them. We're going to keep them for a month. And maybe we keep 1. Maybe we don't keep any. But then we're going to cycle those out. We're going to bring in 4 more. We're going to try and find those Easter eggs where they're located.
Yeah, DJ, I think this year more than ever. And I'm curious, man. I'm really hopeful that the NFL continues to have like the 16-player practice squad, because I think the savvy team builders, those last 5 spots, revolving door. A month-to-month lease when we sign you on practice squad. Don't sign for the long term, because we're rolling these guys in. And you're right. You want to kick the tires on as many.
But those guys, Buck, you'd have to put them on your actual roster. To pluck them off of a practice squad, you got to roster them on your 53. So that's you just make the space.
Yeah, you have to make the space. And so not only am I doing that, but it's almost like an apprenticeship program, right, DJ? So you're turning over the bottom part of the practice squad because you're trying to identify guys. And then you're also turning over the bottom part of your active roster. Now, some of that may be the escalator where it goes up and down from guys practice squad to active roster, but some of that is kicking the tires on outside guys. And with the 6 unlimited spots for the veterans, I just think we're going to see more movement on that developmental chain than we've ever seen before.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me in that you just think of there's some diamonds in the rough that are out there, and you've got to find them. Now, one of the ways that you probably do that is you have to rely on your college grades, right? You go back and say, okay, who are our highest rated players we had coming into the draft process that are on practice squads? Because you'd like to believe in your evaluation that maybe those are the guys most likely to be those diamonds in the rough.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. You really gonna have to work in sync with your college team. And the pandemic creates an opportunity for everyone to unify their scouting department. I think now you have to give some of those tasks that would usually fall just to your pro scouts. I think you have to find a way to keep your college scouts engaged. Like, yes, they can't go on the road, and yes, they need to get ahead and make sure they look at their players. But I think you can involve them more, particularly since we're working in a virtual world. I think you have to involve them more, particularly when it comes to looking at those practice squad candidates.
Yeah, it's interesting. So many different storylines this year in the NFL. Anything you've got going on you're working on this week, Buck? What do you got?
No, we naturally touched on it. I talked about Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the Scouts Notebook, and then also the conversation about Lamar Jackson and Dak Prescott being next up when it comes to the contracts. Like, what does that look like? And so we had that discussion. That's what I'm talking about this week in the Notebook. NFL.com/Bucky Brooks. You can find the notebook there. I've got the new YouTube channel. I'm trying to do some rookie ratings on a weekly basis there. So it's easy. Just youtube.com/move-the-sticks. It's easy to find. So I'm doing just 8 of them. So I'm not going beyond that. I have to do a quarterly. I do a quarterly one for NFL.com, which is 25 rookies every quarter. Too many.
It's a bit much. I like 8. 8 is a nice number for me. And I can do the nice little Brady Bunch video with the little boxes there. So you can check that out. I think that's going to do it for us, man. It was great. I want to thank Coach Shaw again for joining us. Really a fun conversation today. Football is back. We could not be more excited. We've got college football kicking off tomorrow with some of the better teams, so we'll see that. We'll get a chance to recap some of that next week as well. But that's going to do it for us today. I want to thank you guys for watching. Thank you for hopping on Apple Podcasts and leaving us a rating and a review. We do appreciate that as well. That's it. Thank you guys for checking out Move the Six, presented by Zaxby's. We'll see you next time.